World Empires Series Part 14, World War II and the Holocaust Chapters, 95-102, 1939-1945 Add Introduction. We have arrived at the most destructive event in human history. The Second World War killed between 70 and 85 million people, 3% of the world's entire 1940 population. It produced the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, 2/3 of European Jewry, using industrial methods, in full view of the administrative apparatus of a modern state. And it ended with the detonation of 2 atomic bombs over Japanese cities, inaugurating the nuclear age and the possibility of extinction. This is not ancient history. The grandparents and great-grandparents of people alive today lived through these events. The world we inhabit now was shaped by what happened between September 1939 and September 1945. Understanding it is not optional. It is essential. Chapter 95, Blitzkrieg and the Fall of France. Germany invaded Poland on 1 September 1939. Britain and France declared war 2 days later. But the phony war that followed, months of inaction on the Western Front, ended with shocking suddenness in May 1940. Blitzkrieg lightning war was not just speed. It was the coordinated use of tanks, motorized infantry, artillery, and close air support to punch through enemy defenses faster than they could react. The Ardennes forest, which French planners had believed impassable for armored forces, was the route through which the German thrust came. Within days, the Allied armies in Belgium were cut off. The evacuation at Dunkirk, 338,000 troops rescued over 9 days by a fleet of naval vessels and civilian boats, was a miracle of improvisation and a strategic disaster. France signed an armistice on 22 June 1940, in the same railway carriage where Germany had surrendered in 1918, a deliberate humiliation choreographed by Hitler. France was divided, a German-occupied north and a collaborationist government in the south, based in Vichy. Winston Churchill had become Prime Minister on 10 May 1940, the same day the German attack in the West began. His speeches in those dark months of 1940 were some of the most remarkable acts of political communication in history. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender. People listening to those words over the radio felt something they needed to feel, that this could be endured, that it was worth enduring. Chapter 96, The Battle of Britain. To invade Britain, Germany needed air superiority over the English Channel. The Luftwaffe outnumbered RAF Fighter Command by roughly 4-1. What the Germans failed to appreciate was the advantage of radar, a technology the British had deployed along their coastline that gave Fighter Command advance warning of incoming raids, allowing them to concentrate their limited resources where they were needed most. Through the summer of 1940, the battle raged over southern England. German pilots were fighting over enemy territory. If they survived being shot down, they were prisoners. British pilots shot down over their own land could be back in the cockpit within hours. Then Goering made his pivotal mistake. After a British raid on Berlin, small but deeply humiliating to the Nazis, Hitler ordered the Luftwaffe to switch from attacking RAF airfields to bombing London. The Blitz began in September 1940. London was bombed for 57 consecutive nights. But the switch gave the RAF the breathing space it desperately needed to repair airfields and aircraft and rest exhausted pilots. Germany never achieved the air superiority it needed. Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, was postponed and eventually abandoned. Britain survived. And Britain, as Churchill understood, was the essential platform from which the liberation of Europe would eventually be launched. Chapter 97, Operation Barbarossa. On 22 June 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union along a 2,900-kilometer front, the largest military operation in the history of warfare. 3 million German and Axis troops, supported by 3,000 tanks and 2,500 aircraft, struck the Soviet Union simultaneously at multiple points. Stalin had been warned. British intelligence, American intelligence, and his own spy networks had all indicated that the attack was coming. He had refused to believe them. The Red Army, still reeling from Stalin's purge of its officer corps in 1937 and 1938, was caught catastrophically off guard. In the first weeks, the Soviet losses were staggering: hundreds of thousands of prisoners, thousands of tanks destroyed or captured. German forces reached the outskirts of Moscow by November. Then the Russian winter arrived, and the Wehrmacht was equipped for a short campaign, not a Russian winter. Boots, oil, engines, communications equipment, all failed in temperatures of -40 degrees. The Battle of Stalingrad, from August 1942 to February 1943, was the turning point of the entire war. 2 million casualties on both sides. The German Sixth Army, 300,000 men, was encircled by a Soviet counteroffensive and slowly destroyed. When Field Marshal Paulus surrendered his 91,000 survivors in February 1943, it was the greatest defeat in German military history. Germany never regained the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front. The price the Soviet Union paid was incomprehensible: 27 million dead. Every town, every family, every institution was touched by the loss. The Soviet victory in the East was the decisive military fact of the Second World War, and it is sometimes inadequately recognized in Western accounts of the conflict. Chapter 98, The Holocaust. The Holocaust did not begin with the death camps. It began with words, with the identification of Jews as a racial enemy, with legal discrimination, with the exclusion of Jews from German civic life. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 stripped Jews of citizenship. Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, in November 1938, saw Jewish businesses, synagogues and homes destroyed across Germany while the police watched. The final solution, the decision to murder systematically every Jew in Europe, was not made at a single moment. It evolved through a combination of ideology, bureaucratic momentum, and the brutalizing effect of war in the East. The Wannsee Conference of January 1942 was not where the decision was made, but where it was coordinated, senior Nazi officials dividing responsibility for a genocide already underway. 6 extermination camps were built in occupied Poland: Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno and Majdanek. They were not concentration camps where people were imprisoned and worked. They were death factories built for one purpose: the killing of human beings as efficiently as possible. At Auschwitz-Birkenau alone, more than 1 million people were murdered, 90% of them Jews. When Allied forces began liberating the camps in January 1945, what they found overwhelmed even battle-hardened soldiers. General Eisenhower ordered as many Allied troops as possible to see the camps, and as many photographs and films as possible to be taken, because he said he was afraid that someday the world would not believe it had happened. The Nuremberg trials of 1945 and 1946 established the principle, new in international law, that individuals could be prosecuted for crimes against humanity, regardless of whether they had been following orders or acting within the laws of their own state. It was a principle that, imperfectly and inconsistently, has shaped international justice ever since. Chapters 99 through 101, The Pacific, D-Day and the World After the War. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on 7 December 1941 brought the United States into the war. Within months, Japan had conquered a vast arc of territory across Asia and the Pacific: Malaya, Singapore, Burma, the Dutch East Indies, the Philippines. The fall of Singapore in February 1942, with 80,000 British and Commonwealth troops taken prisoner, was the greatest military defeat in British history. The American counteroffensive, island hopping across the Pacific, bypassing heavily defended islands to attack strategic targets, gradually reversed Japan's gains at enormous cost. The planned invasion of the Japanese home islands was estimated to cost 1 million American and tens of millions of Japanese casualties. President Truman authorized the use of the atomic bomb, developed in the Manhattan Project. Hiroshima was bombed on 6 August 1945, killing 80,000 people instantly. Nagasaki was bombed 3 days later. Japan surrendered on 15 August. In Europe, the Normandy landings of 6 June 1944, 156,000 troops on 5 beaches in the largest seaborne operation in history, opened the second front that Stalin had been demanding for years. Paris was liberated in August. Hitler's last offensive in the West, The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 was defeated within weeks. Soviet forces were simultaneously advancing from the east. Hitler shot himself in his Berlin bunker on 30 April 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally on 8 May. The world that emerged from 1945 was shaped by the war's aftermath in ways we still live with. The United Nations was founded. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. The Marshall Plan rebuilt Western Europe. The Cold War divided the world into two armed camps for the next 45 years. The European empires, exhausted and indebted, began the long process of decolonization. And the nuclear age, an age in which human beings possessed the means to end human civilization, had begun. Conclusion of the series: we have come a long way. From Babylon in 722 BC, the empire that swallowed the world and carried God's people into exile, to the mushroom cloud over Hiroshima in 1945. From clay tablets and cuneiform to the atomic bomb. From Nebuchadnezzar to Churchill. What does this journey teach us? Perhaps this: that human history is neither simply progress nor simply tragedy. It is both simultaneously, always. The same centuries that produced the Parthenon and the Analects of Confucius produced slavery and massacre. The same century that produced Beethoven and Goethe produced the Holocaust. And yet something accumulates. The idea that all human beings possess dignity, first articulated in the Hebrew Scriptures, elaborated by the Stoic philosophers, proclaimed by the early Church, institutionalized imperfectly in the Universal Declaration, is more widely held today than it was in 722 BC. The circle of those we consider fully human has expanded, haltingly, generation by generation. That expansion is not guaranteed. History offers no guarantees. But the story of humanity, the long, terrible, magnificent story we have traced from Babylon to Hiroshima, suggests that the possibility of something better is always present, even in the darkest moments. We know this because people in dark moments kept bearing witness. They kept writing, kept teaching, kept arguing, kept insisting that what happened mattered and ought to be remembered. That is what history is, the refusal to let the past be forgotten. Thank you for traveling this far. The story continues. End of the World Empires Series, Parts 1 through 14, 722 BC to 1945 AD.